Thank you, everybody, for coming. Those online, I will monitor, and so if you have questions at the end, just let me know and type them in, and I'll read them out to the group. I'm very excited to introduce you all to Dr. Scott McDonald, who is a professor of science education at Penn State University and chair of curriculum and instruction.
Correct.
Department of Curriculum and Instruction at Penn State as well, and also co-editor of the Journal of Science Education. And he has been working on this project, this partnership project with local schools for many years, and I've heard bits and pieces. So I'm excited for him to kind of talk about it with us, and also really initiate some conversations for us to think about ways in which we can really kind of push ourselves in terms of our partnerships with schools as well. Right after this, the NAU Teach faculty are going to stay here and keep meeting and just kind of have more informal conversations and think about our own programs and the like. Anyone is welcome to stay for that, but that is kind of what happens right after this once we get going. So we'll have some time for questions at the end, but otherwise, please welcome Scott.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for Ron inviting me to talk about basically my life's work. So here you go.
You have an hour.
Right. Nothing like trying to compress your whole life's work into 40 minutes. So that's what I've been trying to do. So I'm going to get started. So the fundamental place where I start with all of this work that I've been doing is in practice-based teacher education. So is this a familiar phrase to everyone here? Okay. So this has been central to the way that I've been practicing teacher ed since I started in 2004, which was a long time ago, 22 years. We actually published a book about this. Dave Stroop, Karen Hammerness, and I edited a book about practice-based teacher education in science ed, and Ron has a chapter in that. So, but I do want to explain a little bit about it. So Grossman and McDonald were probably the ones who most directly talked about this idea. And what they were talking about, at least initially, you could go back to Ball and Cohen, which is about 10 years before that. They probably really introduced it. But this idea of pedagogies of investigation was where we started teacher education. So a lot of what we thought about when we were thinking about how do teachers get better at what they do is we thought about knowledge, we thought about beliefs, we thought about individual attributes or characteristics of teachers that made them good or not good at teaching, right? And we did that for a long time. And then we started to get impacted or influenced by sociocultural theories of learning. And so that notion expanded and moved towards what Grossman and McDonald talked about as pedagogies of enactment, right? So that's where I think teacher ed mostly is living now, in this idea that the focus of what we do is help people understand and enact practices in the world. Less about what are their attributes and more about how do they do what they do and how do we help support them do what they do. So particularly later on, these folks talked about deconstructions, representations, and approximations of practice, right? So these are things that, is this familiar to everybody? Okay, great. I figured you all were. So a lot of what we do and a lot of my early research was around that, was around using video, using peer teaching, using approximations and deconstructions of practice for students to help them understand teaching. But it still was frustrating to me. It still wasn't getting me where I wanted to go with my students. And so this is from another group of folks who also do a lot of teacher ed work. So I want to read this as sort of a central piece of what I was trying to figure out. In the same way that conducting looks like hand waving to the uninitiated, teaching looks simple from the perspective of students who see a person talking and listening, handing out papers and giving assignments. Right, so I wrote a paper about this, about the sort of invisible and transparent nature of teaching, right? So to the person who's enacting it, to the expert teacher, it's essentially transparent. They're doing what they do, and they don't say, oh, I'm doing this particular thing right now because it accomplishes some goal, and down the road it's going to turn into this other thing. And for the novices sitting in the room watching this, it's completely invisible what's happening. Like things are just magically occurring, and somehow students are doing things and teachers are doing things, and they don't know what's going on. So my problem, my central problem of practice that's motivated me for these last 22 years had to do with we have developed this relatively sophisticated set of teaching practices. So this is science specific, and I know you're not all science folks. But this is ambitious science teaching, and there are 4 core sets of practices around this. And what I was doing for a long time was using these to structure teacher ed classrooms where I would show them video. They would videotape themselves. They would analyze that video. They would talk about that. We would talk about that. And then what would happen is they would go out into schools and there would not be a change in their practice, right? So this is all familiar to all of you, right? This is not, yeah, okay. Right, so we're all in the same boat. So one of the things I noticed, so I did a lot of professional development in the last 4 or 5 years in the state, and I was helping intermediate units. Do you have intermediate units in Arizona? So they're like sort of in between the state and the individual district. There are these intermediate units that are collections of school districts that get services from these intermediate units.
The county version.
You have county-based things. Okay. So when we rolled out Pennsylvania, after, interestingly enough, 22 years, changed their standards in the state of Pennsylvania. So they have the same standards for the last 22 years. We finally got to an NGSS aligned set of standards. And in that process, I started working with intermediate units to prepare teachers for these new standards. And one of the things I noticed is when they were talking with people about this change in practice, they would put up this table. And I don't know if you've ever seen this table before or some version of it. Actually, I got this directly out of Todd's publication.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry, Todd. So what I want you to do is just take a second and imagine yourself as a science teacher and read these 2 columns a little bit and tell me how it makes you feel if you're a science teacher.
Judged.
Yeah.
I was a traditional science teacher. I wasn't sure about my practice.
You identified with anything over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
less of what you're doing.
Yeah. Any other feelings that people get? If you're, yeah, again, imagine yourself as maybe a really good traditional science teacher.
I would, if I was a science teacher, I would say, yeah, I've heard all this before. And how?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many constraints. Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't do this. I have 25 kids.
Absolutely.
And, like,
25 is
administration is going on.
Yeah. Congratulations on it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that struck me is that what this does is it position it, I mean, the word I would use, which is similar to the word that you used, is shaming. Like, you're shaming folks. You're saying this is what you do and you're bad. And this is what you should be doing instead. You should be doing the good stuff on the right. Right? So this is when we think about practice-based teacher education, they're fundamentally, we're trying to get people to change and do a different kind of practice, right? This is fundamentally what we want. And we know that they're doing something different than we want now. But doing this just makes them feel bad about themselves, right? And so this is a quote from Anais Nin, I think, it was attributed to her, so I'm gonna use it. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And I think this is important because I think one of the things that we fundamentally don't understand or don't think about when we think about practice-based teacher education or any kind of teacher education is when we're asking people to see things differently, but what we're really asking them to do is be different people. And that's a lot different. That is hard. You are saying you need to be a new kind of person. And again, if we open that conversation with telling them that who they are is shameful, this doesn't lead to really positive change for most folks, right? Because what do? They hunker down and say, well, I can't do this. Here's all the reasons. I have 25 students in my class. I have this. I have constraints. I don't have enough time to do this. I don't know what you're talking about. Those students don't look like my students. They have all these reasons, right? Because you've now shamed them into this, what you're doing now is bad. So this creates what in the literature we talk about as the 2 worlds problem, right? So what this means is we in the universities live in one world, and in our world, there's these right kinds of practices, and we do it good and we do it right, and kids learn the way they're supposed to. And then there's the other world, which is the schools, where things are not done right. And they're done badly, or at least just normal, but not real good. Sort of bless you. Right? So this is a well-established, bless you, notion that's been in the field a long time, right? Melissa Broughton wrote a really nice science ed piece about this two worlds problem. But this was fundamentally the problem that I was struggling with. So I wanted to do practice-based teacher education. I wanted my students to focus on practice, but there was this disconnect between where I lived and where my mentor teachers and the schools lived. And so that's what I was working on trying to break down, right? So that's where I got to this idea of partnership, right? Which sounds really nice. Partnership sounds lovely, right? But if any of you have partners, you understand. Partnerships are complicated. They are not always beautiful, wonderful things that go seamlessly all the time and everybody is joyous and caring and concerned about each other. So partnership work is hard work, and it's been long work for me, but I want to talk a little bit about what that looked like for me. So I want to start with the geography of this. So on my ride in with Ron last night from the airport, I was thinking a lot and talking with him about the parallels between Flagstaff and State College. There are a lot of parallels. We're similar sized places. We're in the mountain. Well, people in Pennsylvania would say we're in the mountains. I lived in Colorado for 6 years, so when I went to interview there, I was like, well, I mean, you've got some nice hills. But population wise, size wise, there are many similarities, right? We have big universities in relatively small towns. But this is my geography. So my job is there at Penn State University. You can't quite see it, but that's where my office is. Not where the green flag is, but where the other thing is. Just for reference, that's my house. I'm not just trying to violate my operational security, so I'm not going to give you my address, but that's where I live. And then the middle school that I ultimately did all of my work with was up here where the Gold Star is, right? And those are biking distances because I bike where I go. So from my office to this middle school is a 28-minute bike ride, and from my home to either my office or that middle school is about a 15-minute bike ride. So I understand that that's a privilege, right? That I can be that close to where I work and that close to my collaborators and my partners. And the high school, which is the other place that I'm increasingly working, is right down here, even closer than all this. Okay, so I had the geography in my favor. I was in pretty good shape there. But where I started out, so this is a very fast overview of the whole thing. Again, so I started in 2004 at Penn State. It's now 2026. So when I arrived, we were not allowed by the school district to place any secondary science students in the district. The current department head said to us, at that time there were 4 secondary science education faculty that included Greg Kelly and Rick Duschel, if you know those folks. So we had 4 of us meet with the head of the department head of secondary science, and he said, well, if you just give us all the folders for all of the student teachers, we'll tell you which ones we're going to take and who's going to take them, and then we'll give you back the ones that we don't want. And we said, or not, or we did not do that. So we did not have any placements. There was one science teacher in the district that had graduated from Penn State 2 decades ago. The pedagogy was typical, whatever you want to think of as status quo sort of science teaching. One of the things that they did that I would argue made their pedagogy actually less than typical in terms of quality, they had tremendous emphasis on content background. So they had a lot of folks who had PhDs in their discipline who had been hired to teach science. This, in my opinion, did not do good things for them, but they thought it was really amazing. I was essentially unknown to the science teachers, and the only connection that the university and the school had was there was a 1 day where the methods class went to the middle school and did 20-minute station lessons, right? So they just did like boop. And 2 students would sit with a group of 4 students, or 2 pre-service teachers would sit with 4 students, and they did a little rotation. Right. So fast forward 22 years later, right? And I'm gonna tell you how, well, I'm not gonna tell you everything, but I'm gonna tell you some of how I got from here to here, right? So now all my students, my entire cohort, which in fairness, this year is 11 students. So I'm imagining you have a similar, how many science students do you have?
It's a little bit bigger.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the lowest we've been in the last few years. Usually we're between like in the high teens to low 20s. Yeah. This year not so great. But they're all placed in the district. I have 12 science teachers in the district now that graduated from my program. The pedagogy, in my opinion, is exemplary of this kind of practice that I'm hoping for, which is why I got involved with this. I am essentially part of the teacher community. I want to give one brief example of that. So I was in schools Wednesday this week, right before I was to get on the plane, observing and talking with the biology teachers there. And they've been working on the curriculum for biology, and they're using MBI. And we were talking about that, and they said, oh, well, we're using some of the units, but we have some feedback because we think there's some things that aren't so great or that need to be, that maybe the content's wrong, or here's some things and we've got some feedback. Because I had told them, Ron invited me out to go give a talk, and they said, oh, great. So they shared, yeah, so they shared 3 pages, 3 individual documents that are feedback on the different MBI units that they're using because they want me to make Ron read that. That's going to be his weekend homework. But I move now relatively seamlessly in and out of school buildings. I go into classrooms. And it's a wonderful gift that I had, that was given me or that I've gotten. But the thing I really want to talk about that's sort of this cornerstone for me of this whole project is that my methods class is now fully embedded in the middle school. Right? So what do I mean by that? So Penn State has a 15-week semester. And the methods course that I teach is the right before their student teaching, and so it's linked to a field experience. Is this? I don't know how similar this is to you. Somewhat similar. Yeah. So they have we call it their middle field experience because they have an early one, and then this is the middle one, and then they have student teaching. Right. So my class and this class are linked. The reason that matters is that class blocks out all my student schedules until noon every day of the week, because there's depending on which content area you're in, there's some period of time where students are in schools every day. And so they block out their schedule every day until noon. So in the past, my methods course sat in that space around when they were in schools. So it met Tuesdays and Thursdays for a while, then they were in schools for a while, and then they came back to me for a while. But what I realized is that was an artifact of the way that those 2 classes were constructed, but it didn't have to be the way it was organized. So the first gift that I got from the universe is for this partnership is I could do whatever I wanted with them in that time. I could tell them to come to class whenever I wanted, as long as it comported with their field experience, that they got the field experience time that they need. So because they couldn't say I have another class at that time, because their classes were blocked out. Okay, so what that meant and what it now looks like is for the first 8 weeks, they are with me in a middle school every other day for about 3 hours. So that is the beginning of their semester. And unlike unlike everyone else at Penn State in the teacher education program, they start the first day of school. So they get to see, here's the first day, here's what it looks like, here's how teachers begin, here's what creating a culture of students who talk and interact looks like, right? So I have 8 weeks with them where every other day I'm in middle school with them for 3 hours. Then they have this period now that shrunk a little bit, but is 3 weeks long, where they go to their student teaching placements. So they have a student teaching placement that they'll eventually go to the following semester. Some of them will be at this middle school, some of them will be at other schools, but they go to connect with their student teacher placement for 3 weeks. And then at the end of the semester, they come back to me for 4 weeks for just classy class. where we come to the university, we sit and talk, we debrief and finish up assignment. Okay? So now I want to talk about these 8 weeks, because these are the really critical ones for me.
Ask you a quick.
Yes, please.
Undergrad or grad years?
Both. So we have a traditional undergrad program, and then we have a 4+1 program that layers on top of that. So they essentially, by the time they get into the semester before mine, where there is a methods course, they either take that while they're in their undergrad at Penn State, finishing up their science undergrad, or they have to do a less good summer version of that, where they work with me in the summer, especially if they're coming from another institution. But most of our folks are internal, so they're getting a degree in science and then they're adding their cert after. But by this point, they're all together in one cohort. Okay, so as I said, the middle school, this is the second gift that the universe gave me, right? So the middle school changed to an A-B block schedule. So is that what everybody know what that means? Every other day is, so you have 4 classes one day, 4 classes the next day, 80 minutes each time. And then for the time that we were going to be there, right, which is from whenever the day begins till not later than noon, it worked out that the 8th grade teachers had students with them for the first block, and then had planning and or prep for the second block. And the 7th grade had the reverse of that. They had prep in the morning, and then they had middle school students in the or the first block and second block. So that meant that I could divide my students up across all these classrooms. Some of them in 8th grade, some of them in 7th grade, eventually some of them in 6th grade too, but our certification band is 7 through 12. So it's another thing we talk about. It's complicated and too bad because we have great 6th grade teachers, but we can't place people there because then they're outside their certification band. This is dumb, in my opinion. Anyway, so what this means is that every day I would have a group of students who were in with a mentor teacher working with kids, and then they would be with me doing class. And the other group of students was the reverse, right? Now that makes it sound more structured than it was. It wasn't actually exactly like that, right? Many times all of us would go into these classrooms and then debrief, or we would plan something together and then go into the other classrooms. Like, it's very fluid, and it's gotten more and more fluid. There are 6 mentors that are involved. So you can see if I have 11 students, there's only a couple in each room. When I had more like 20, they're bigger groups, but we've always been able to do this. And so what has evolved is essentially a really organic and lovely learning community that involves mentor teachers, myself, the supervisors, all these student teachers, and then a bunch of middle school kids. And people move around these classrooms basically at will. So I just walk in and out of classrooms for this whole time. My students do the same. We have conversations. You've probably heard about this in other contexts. I think Elham Kazemi talked about this, but we have conversations over the heads of the kids. So we'll talk about teaching in front of the students, the middle school students, about, well, wait a minute, what you just did there, maybe we want to run that back and ask them a different kind of question. And we don't huddle in the corner, we just talk about that out loud across the room, right? So the students start to get that there's stuff going on here that they aren't aware of, which is also pretty cool. And the other thing that is manifested out of this is my mentors, especially because I've been doing this configuration since 2017. So for quite a while now, my mentor teachers are essentially teacher educators now, because they're used to this. Because when we're in this part, they have prep or planning, so they're often sitting in the room with us, and so they chime in, or they start a conversation or whatever it is. And so they see how I talk with my students about teaching. They talk with them about teaching, and it's become this very like flowing situation where we all just get to talk about teaching together, which is pretty remarkable.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to say this is a place to stop because this is probably where.
So your students in the classrooms, are they teaching? Are they observing? What are they doing?
Yes, well, haven't you just hit on the bone of contention? So, what is it when you say teaching? What do you mean?
They do the lesson with the students in the class or they?
What do you mean by that?
Are you seeing me out of my?
Yes. Oh, good, even better. You're an administrator, is that what you?
Yeah, I'm not in the classroom.
Oh, well, you've been in this,
Yeah.
Yeah, and you observe in classrooms, so you have a notion.
I don't do anything.
You don't, you don't do anything. Wait, you're recording this meeting, right?
She's our dean right
Yeah.
now.
So that's what I'm saying, did you get that on the recording?
Yeah, right.
You just said that she doesn't do it.
She's retired, she can say that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought we had something going there. No, I think this has been, so the answer is yes, and they do all of those things. So there's lots of pedagogies that are going on simultaneously. One of the challenges about moving to this has been my work with the supervisor. Because the supervisor, and I don't know who your supervisors are, but this particular supervisor was a chemistry teacher for 35 years and retired and then moved to State College because her family was nearby and took this as a job for what she calls her grandma money, right? So she does this not because she's deeply invested in our teacher education program, but because this is what she wants to do. So she would ask me questions like that all the time. I have to observe them teaching, so they need to teach. And I would say to her, well, I mean, they're doing it all the time. Look at them, they're talking, there they are, look at them, see them doing it now? They're talking to children in small groups. Sometimes they're leading the lesson, but this became a challenge of like, well, what does it mean to be the teacher in the class? Especially because at this point in the semester, like when they're here, there's at least 2 of my students, sometimes as many as 4, and a mentor teacher, and maybe me in the room, and maybe other people, and all of us are talking with kids and doing stuff, right? Because these are not lecture-based classes. These are ambitious science teaching classes. These are kids talking about their own ideas a lot. So one of the challenges we actually have is making sure that kids get left alone. Because when you have that many adults in the room, they need time to talk to each other. And if you've got that many adults, they're all sort of hovering and listening and then poking. So we have to talk with our students about that too. But yeah, I mean, this was the problem is the supervisor would say, well, when should I come and observe? Because they need to be teaching. And I would say, well, come any day. And she would say, well, I need a day when they're leading class. And even that is frankly difficult because a lot of what they're doing is, they may be introducing something, they may be debriefing something, but often they're not teaching in that same way. So yeah, it's a complicated thing. We're still working on that. Yeah, other questions about this, either mechanics of it or concepts of it? Or...
This is the semester before they go into student teaching.
Yeah, so this was this past fall.
One semester. Okay.
Yeah, and then they're all student teaching right now.
I assume these mentors are some of those graduates of your
program. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But yeah, but they're I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up with these folks, but
the other mentor is also the classroom teacher, that class.
Yeah. Yeah, so these 6 are the 6 instructors of record of those classrooms. Yeah.
Do you do any work with those mentors, like prior to your students coming in? Like, do they know what you're trying to get of your class, like the goals of your class, like what your students are supposed to be learning?
Yeah. Let me come back to that question.
Okay.
Because the short answer is no, and the long answer is yeah, a lot.
I mean, I'm sure those conversations
So,
that you have, absolutely, but
yeah.
I didn't know if beforehand you have any. If you connected from beforehand to give them a heads up or to have conversations.
Yeah, that happened historically rather than, well, that's what I'm saying. Let me get to it because I'll come to it. Okay, so now I need to talk about an important question before I transition to the next section of what we're talking about. So this is a key question to answer in teacher education. So I'm going to ask you to talk in groups. You have a group of 4, you have a group of 4, you have a group of 4. I'm not going to give you much time to do this, but I'm going to warn you that at the end of this, you're going to have to, with your meat hand, say, yes, a hot dog is a sandwich, or no, a hot dog is not a sandwich. This is not an option, to be clear. This is not an option. This is a binary. You either say a hot dog is a sandwich or it is not a sandwich. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. As I said, this is very important that you do this seriously for 3 minutes. So your time begins now. Do you want to try and put those people in a group, or do you want to?
Maybe chat, maybe they can do it in the chat.
Okay. So you're to do it in the chat if you're on Zoom. You there.
The definition is there's like the part of that was that say why it was. He didn't ask me, but. I would just be like, you know, like it's just like questions. You know, yes, are usually good. I'm really. Yeah. Yeah, it's long, yes.
What about? So. What do we call it?
It's like a scrap sandwich.
Right, make it like yes, I don't okay.
It's not as feeling about sandwiches, like, they're hamburgers.
So if you got this red and folded it, it's out there, that. Here's your stand. What would you say? Yeah, it's all right.
No, you don't have to. Yeah, you can look at it. No, well, see, this is the thing. I understand. Not bad. All right, you have 30 seconds left. To be clear, you don't all have to agree. You can have your own individual answer. This does not require agreement. Okay. Open face sandwiches. Okay, so first, get ready. Have your hands ready. Everybody have your hand ready? Ready, set, go. Up is yes. Okay, Sam. Okay. Wait. Keep your thumbs up. Look around. Look. These. So now you know the people that you can trust and the people that you cannot trust. Okay. Right. So why did I ask you to do this silly exercise? Well, first, let's talk about what happened. Yeah. So yeah, somebody said what a definition of a sandwich. So first, you all drew on experience, right? So this is your table, right? I don't need a hot dog in a bun, so therefore I have an answer for this question. It's not a sandwich because it's just this tubular piece of meat. Right? You probably developed a model of some kind. If there are two pieces of bread and there's stuff in between, then that's a sandwich. But then it's like, well, what did you find as alternatives to that? Open face sandwich, wrap, taco around here, pita, right? So you tested the boundaries of your model. What about a taco? What about like Ron had a fold over? What if you took one piece of bread and put the stuff in the middle and smunched it up and then handed it to somebody? Is that a sandwich? Right? But importantly for me, what I wanted you to think about is what you were doing, you were sense making by negotiating with each other, right? You were putting on the table, here's my idea, here's my thinking, what's your thinking? And you went back and forth. And that process of negotiation for me is not just supporting learning, it is learning, right? And this is important. This is an important distinction for me because I think of negotiation as learning, and in contrast to this. So if you have children or ever were a child, I hope you were exposed to Leo Leone. So this is fish. And here's Frog explaining to fish what cow is. So take a minute and look at that. Right? So when I look at this, I say, this is what happens when learning environments do not involve negotiation. when what happens is I tell you what a thing is, right? Because what happens is I tell you what a thing is using some combination of words that I understand are associated with the thing. And then you take those words and based on your own experience and your own interpretation, you create the fish cow, right? You create this, whatever it is, homunculus creature that eats seaweed and, right? So for me, learning is negotiation, like learning as negotiation. This is really important, and it's important, and I frame it in terms of professional vision. I don't know if this is a thing that you're familiar with, right? So this is from a linguistic anthropologist, Charles Goodwin, and I'm going to put up the quote that defines this, right? So he said, professional vision consists of socially organized ways of seeing and understanding events that are answerable to the distinct interests of a particular social group, right? So for me, this is what teacher learning is about organized seeing and understanding, and that this happens through social processes, right? We talk with each other about what these practices look like, and that's how we understand what the practices are. Practices don't exist on some level independent of that negotiation. They are that negotiation. So that means if we're going back to the two worlds problem, that we have to think about how those two worlds interact and how to make this more of a negotiation. So the way I think about that, I'm going to give you two ways that I think about that. One is understanding over knowing. So for me, this is a distinction that's important. Knowing is the individual things that you know, right? So this goes back to the practice-based teacher education literature and Grossman and McDonald, right? So knowing was this idea of attributes or things that you have, that you carry with you. Understanding, for me, is about relationships. It is the relationships between those things. So if you understand something, you have relationships between the things that you know. And what you all were doing when you were negotiating a hot dog and a sandwich was you were negotiating understanding of the relationship of the things that you know. Well, what do I know? Like if I asked you if you were when you walked into this room, do you know what a sandwich is? You'd all say, of course I know what a sandwich is. That's a stupid question. But now you understand that you don't know what a sandwich is because you understand that sandwiches, like teaching practices, are socially negotiated things that don't have clear boundaries and constraints that exist the same over time and over context. They are different things. So the other way I think about this is carrying over cognition. And I think this has to do with both K-12 schools and with teachers, but I think we focus a lot in schooling on cognition. Can kids do certain cognitive tasks? And we've lost track of the caring part of it, right? And I think this is true in teacher education too. We tend to think that they need certain knowledge rather than understanding that what they need is to become new people. And to do that, they need support and caring from professionals like us. Okay, so why do I care about any of that? Because, well, actually, I'll stop there and see if there are questions about that section, because now I've talked about how I think about learning. Everyone agrees with me.
Yeah, you can't test that.
I can't. No, you mean the thing that I said.
The negotiation.
Well, you can test
not
it
in a standardized.
Yeah, we can't test it in the ways that well, but this is the pernicious bit of the system, right? This is what happens when we privilege one way of knowing, is then we construct a whole system around that way of knowing, and then you say, well, we can't, like, what are you talking about? We can't test it because this is the system we have. It's like, yeah, okay, but the system sucks. And can't we talk about that first and then talk about the testing? But we don't do that. We just say that. And I agree. I mean, this is a systemic problem. And it leads to this issue of then, how do we think about scaling? So since are we all science and math people? Yeah. No. You're not anything according to Mark. I mean,
There's some non folks on.
there's some non-science and math folks there. Okay, so what I'll say for the non-science and math folks and maybe not. No, I think this is true of everything. So the way that education generally thinks about scaling is that we're going to develop some product, and that thing is going to go out into the world and it's going to change practice. So the most common way that that happens is curriculum. And I've done a lot of this work. I want to be perfectly clear. I've had NSF projects where, in addition to doing teacher professional development, they also did curriculum development. And the idea of that curriculum was that these are going to transform schools. We've been doing that for a long time. There was a huge curriculum movement in the 60s in particular that tried to do this through curriculum. Not particularly effective, because part of the problem is, going back to my notion of negotiation, what's happened with traditional notions of scaling is we send these products out into the world and then they get locally negotiated. But there's nobody there who developed the products to engage in that negotiation. So it's all local, and the local context already has its practices. It's not, these things get negotiated into the practices that are already present in the place, right? They're not independent. So what I've tried to do, and I want to be perfectly clear, right? I've been doing this for 22 years, but what I'm doing now is looking back at what I did and explaining it to myself as being rational in a whole set of steps that I went through to get to this place, which is not how it happened at all, right? It was mostly dumb luck and occasionally having things work out the way that I thought they were going to. But what I want to do is think about scaling in the way that design-based researchers tend to think about scaling. And this is Gravemeyer and Cobb, and they talk about, if you want to change something, you have to understand it. And if you want to understand something, you have to change it, right? So these things have to work together. Change and understanding are linked to each other. They're not independent of each other. So if I want to understand how teachers develop these teaching practices, I have to figure out how to change it. And then while I'm changing it, try to understand it and use that understanding to change it more. And it becomes a cycle, hopefully a virtuous. Okay. So now I'm going to give you the really straightforward, here's the history. And this is when we can talk about your question, I think.
Okay.
Okay. So I arrived, I want to remind you, 2004. So the first movement at all was in 2009. So I waited 5 years for this, right? So the science department coordinator, aforementioned gentleman who said, bring me the folders and we're going to talk, right? He retired. God bless us. So in that year, I got my first placements in the district at the middle school, where I had at this point one of my former students who had graduated with me in my second years as a teacher educator, went and taught in Philadelphia schools, and then came back and got a job at this middle school. So I got my first placement there. Then in 2011, I got an NSF funded project that included as a component of it professional development workshops. So this goes to your question, right? So what I did, even though it wasn't intended to support the work that I was doing, I went to the middle school teachers and said, hey, you all should come to this thing. And so 3 of them did. And that began the conversation of like, what kind of teaching do I want them doing? And therefore, what kind of teaching what should my methods course look like to get them there? Right. But I wasn't talking about that then. At this point, I was still talking with them about their teaching. Right. Okay. So a year later, they started experimenting with CER. Everybody knows what CER is, right? Yeah. So at the time, this is pre-NGSS. This is claims evidence reasoning. One of my colleagues, Carla Zembelsaw, was influential in this piece, and she was part of this project. So that was the framing. We talked about storylines. There were other things in science ed that were prevalent at that time, but we didn't yet have the practices as we construct them now. And the practices that constructed AST, probably the first paper came out in 2012, basically. So I was already doing some of this stuff in advance of that because those were people I knew and I worked with, but this was the beginning of the experimentation. So I'll go a little faster through the rest of this, but 2014, they first start attempting phenomenon. And this was a big one. I worked with the district, and the local district that I worked with adopted NGSS, even though the state of Pennsylvania did not. So we were able to get them to say yes to adopting NGSS with the idea that we thought it was coming. And it turned out we were prescient in that regard. It just It's just that this was 2014 and Pennsylvania didn't adopt NGSS line standards until 2022. So it was a little while, but we were a little ahead of our time. 2015, they start developing their own units. So they developed a phenomenon-based unit called the Happy Sad Ball, which is about kinetic and potential and different forms of energy, transformation energy. It's a really cool unit. We're still trying to get them to publish all their units. They ultimately, well, I'm about to talk about this. In 2017, I got my first, it was the first year I did the embedded methods course that I talked about. And we had another round, I had another grant, so we had another round of professional development. At this point, they're starting to be engaged with the planning of the professional development, right? So they're on the advisory board for the grants, like they're starting to be integrated into the projects at a different level, right? 2018, the whole district adopts this homegrown curriculum that this middle school developed. So they developed a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade curriculum. The whole district adopted it, which is really just 2 schools. But even then, naming it as the actual curriculum of the district was a big deal. And then in 2020, I started to get my students hired into the district. And in particular, my immediate graduates, which was a big deal because at that, one of the things about State College, and we were talking about this, I don't know if this is true of Flagstaff, but State College is wealthy compared to the surrounding communities. Which means that teachers get jobs outside of State College when they first graduate, and then they lay in wait for the science jobs to open at State College so they can move to State College, right? But my students were getting hired into the district ahead of people who had experience because the district was starting to recognize this was a thing we needed to care about, right? So more got hired in 21, more got hired in 24, including replacing 2 of the people at the middle school where I was working, which was great because I was terrified when they posted those jobs that I was going to get who knows what. But I got 2 of my grads, more hires in 25. And then in 25, one of my original people got named department head from the middle school, who is the one who sent me the stuff for Ron. So
Better get on that.
yeah. Otherwise, they're gonna think I'm not influential. We need them to think that. Yeah.
So what NSF grants, obviously things have changed, but what NSF grants did you use to support or?
Yeah. So the first one was an MSP grant, and that one was large. And had a lot of pieces to it. The other 2 were both the RK-12. So I didn't put there's a third one that came maybe in 2018. I can't remember now what the timing was. And those 2, so the first one was a sort of large scale change in practices sort of grant that included higher ed and K-12 teachers, and it was a big grant. And it took 7 years. He did it for 7 years. Then the other 2 were curriculum and technology development grants. Actually, there were 3. So those were all developing curriculum with technology tools around data visualizations and simulations around climate science and earth science, and then professional development associated with that. So, and teachers were on advisory boards for that and gave curriculum feedback and everything. And we're we collected lots of video. I'm not talking about the research at all, but I have a lot of video in these classrooms, these folks teaching. Yeah, sorry. Close here. Okay. So in summary, thank you, Ron, for telling me how much time I have left. So I'm going to go back to my title and break this down into pieces, right? So for me, the partnership's the most important thing. That's what drives all of the success is the partnership. But then there are these 3 other pieces that I told you were important: the practice-based teacher education, the negotiation, the scaling. So I'm going to give you 3 little takeaways in each of these areas for me. So in practice-based teacher education, maximizing the integration of the 2 worlds. The more you are in the same space, the better, right? And right now we don't have a lot of that in teacher ed. We tend to send our kids out, send the supervisor out as our liaison. They do some observing. Maybe they talk to the mentor teacher a little and then they return, right? Focus on problems without ceilings. So this is Jessica Thompson's work. So this, I mean, you can read this paper, it's a great paper, but essentially the idea is like, don't focus on trivial things. We don't want to think about like how to increase test scores, but you have to negotiate that, right? But that focus is important because problems without ceilings don't get solved, they just get continually renegotiated. So you move them a little bit and then you say, oh, well, it's working pretty well, but it's still not where we want it, so we renegotiate it. And then making the invisible visible, so that's shamelessly talking about stuff that I do, but I think this is incredibly important. Like a lot of what we do is talking about what was happening in these classrooms. Okay, negotiation, understanding over knowing, carrying over cognition. And I mentioned this when you guys were doing the hot dog and sandwich, but this time apart and time together is incredibly important. And it's not just important in K-12 classrooms. It's important when I'm doing the teacher ed work in those schools. So I have to leave my students to talk to each other. And I also, because I have to, leave the school and let them talk about this stuff. And that helps because they negotiate their own new meanings. And when I come back, now we have new things to talk about because they've changed how they're thinking about these things. And then I have to re-engage with them. I learn from them, they learn from me, we go apart from each other, we come back together. So this negotiation is critical and central. And then last, this idea of scaling, have patience. I mean, it took me a long time to get here, but it's hard to have patience. We don't want to do it, but it's the only thing that works. Take advantage of serendipity. Like I told you, my little gifts from the universe, but there were lots of other things. You always have to be trying to take advantage of that, solve other people's problems, right? So a lot of what I did, especially in the beginning, was they would say, hey, we need some PD on this day for all the science teachers. Will you come in and do it? Yep, sure I will. We're having trouble doing, analysis of our test results. Will you help us think through that? Sure, of course I will. Right. So that kind of, if you're seen as opposed to how we typically come in, which is like, you're here to solve my problem. I need a placement for my student teachers. I need a context for my research, whatever it is, right? And then this build internal and external community to the best that you can. I mean, people have asked, one of the most common things is, do you have a lot of turnover? Ron asked me this last night. The truth is there's not that much turnover. There is some, but there's not that much. But in the last 2 years, we've had a lot. And what I've seen is because the community is internally strong, that has gone about as smoothly as it could, right? So people are getting replaced with people who have similar points of view. There's now a culture that this is important work in the school. And so I don't have to be there as a cheerleader anymore. They sort of are doing this all themselves. I don't know how much they even need me. Okay, so I'll finish with this slightly self-aggrandizing statement from Margaret Mead. Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. Fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And I'm not done.
Thank you. If anyone has questions, anyone online have questions, please jump in and I will read them.
I didn't leave much time. Apologies. Yes,
I was really intrigued by the quote on understanding and change, and you have, in order to understand something, you have to change it. I'm just curious how you personally have been changed by this book that you practice.
yeah, I mean, so much. Yeah, I mean, that's a profound question. Honestly, I don't.
I like going to the heart of
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Everything. Like one of the projects I've done in my dotage is I've gone back because I have video recordings of my classrooms going back to 2004, both of my students teaching and of me teaching in teacher ed, and that's a humbling experience. So yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Watch yourself on video.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to that 2-column problem, right? Like when you become a different person, the hard thing is you have to look back at who you were and say, ooh, that's not, if I were that person now, like, what would I, yeah. So I think I'm very different. I'm a lot more humble than I used to be. And I'm not that humble, if we're being perfectly honest. I just told you all the great things I did and how smart I am, but
That also influences your interactions with your current students and how you have changed, and so it is a cycle in that way, so.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to recognize, you do have to see your expertise as limited. And I'm not sure I did in 2004 as much as I do now. So they call that wisdom, I think.
Excellent, thank you. That's a great presentation.
Thanks for coming and not doing anything. I appreciate that.
You gotta head off and not do much.
Yeah, more not doing to get done.
You don't know me, so I can live it.
Yeah, I got that vibe, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, logistically, how do you manage to make it fit into your day just to be in the classrooms as much as you're talking about?
Yeah,
And
it's,
still do research and scholarship and all that.
I have no idea. I mean, I genuinely
Fair. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, massive.
and yeah, I'm right, so I'm chair of a massive department.
And a
Well,
co-editor of a major journal. and all
Yeah.
that.
right, so yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. I think what happens is that what gets done are the things that you're committed to.
Yeah,
And Ron can testify, because I've had one of, well, Ron and Sam, I've had a paper from Ron and Sam for,
It's like 7 years, I think.
yeah, 7 years that I'm supposed to be revising and helping them with, and if that's what you're calling it, and I haven't touched it, so. Yeah, it's hard. The fall is really, really difficult, especially those 8 weeks where, because I not lose, that's the wrong word, but I'm in schools and I have to get there by 8:30 or 8:15, and I'm there until noon, and that's at least 2 days a week. Some weeks it's 3 days a week because the AB schedule, right? So some weeks it's Monday, and that is also catastrophic to my schedule.
yeah.
Because some weeks is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and some weeks is Tuesday, Thursday. So I can't have standing meetings. I can't have anything happening for me on a regular basis in that window
Right.
either. I don't know. But I know it doesn't happen without me doing that.
Sure.
I don't know how much longer I'll keep doing it. Well, the whole omnibus project, I don't know how much longer I'm gonna be doing my job, but doing this, yeah, I don't know. That wasn't a very satisfying answer, I'm sure.
No, but I understand.
But I felt like I have to be there. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And not because I think I'm the most important person, but because I have a critical role, and if I'm not there, there's nobody playing that role. And that's a problem. Now, I think they're pretty damn near not needing me.
Yeah.
If I'm perfectly honest.
But
Like,
that took 22 years to get
yeah,
to that point.
right.
So, related question, how many science ed folks now are in your department and how many are in the classrooms as much as you?
Well, nobody in my whole department is in classrooms as much as I am, unless they're supervised. So I spend more time in classrooms than any other faculty member. And that's not a brag, that's just a statement of fact. I am the only secondary science education faculty member. Full-time. We had two of us, and one of us departed, and last year we had a search. So there are 3 elementary science education folks, which is great, because they're great colleagues and they're helpful, but. Yeah, but they have their own problems, they have their own fish to fry.
I have one question from online, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you, Dr. McDonald. As you were building this
Oh, I'm
partnership,
staying
can you talk of any processes of buy-in from mentor teachers and from the district to encourage teachers to mentor? In other words, at times there are a limited supply of teachers willing to mentor due to constraints in classrooms.
Yep.
And all that is on their plates, or don't they feel they're getting any return for their membership? How do you negotiate this?
Yeah, I mean, the right word in there is negotiation. It's just ongoing and constant, and every time administrators change, we redo it. Right, so we redo the process, but now. The folks in the middle school. Pretty much take student teachers every year, which is frankly remarkable, because they're really good teachers. And they're giving up a lot of instructional time to let my students be in their class and longer. So, so they advocate for that part, and having one of my folks as department head helps, because she goes and knocks on doors and asks people. But we've had to negotiate a lot. I mean, the school districts, in the past have said teachers can only take a student teachers every so often, right? There are rules about that, so we had to negotiate that and say, well, okay, but what if they really want to, and what if this is really good, and some of it is, I mean, if I'm honest, like they're also, both the district broadly in the middle school specifically are getting recognized outside for the work that they're doing, and that helps a lot too. Because when you're going to administrators and saying, hey, you know, this person's now the regional representative for the Pennsylvania Science Teachers Association and is doing professional development for teachers across the state. Like, oh, well, then that's important. And why are they doing that? Well, because they've been involved in this. So, I mean, not just because of that, but they've grown a lot. And as a result, their administrators see that as a positive thing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Scott has a question, but he's gonna stay for the next one, so I'll give it to you when we start off on the
Yep.
next one. But otherwise, join me in thanking Dr. McDonald.
Yeah, thank you all.